What common old TV trope would be completely unacceptable today? Story 1. Very special episodes where characters meet life-altering situations or drug addictions, teen pregnancy, gun violence, and then are back to being carefree the next episode. The most egregious example of this I've seen was on 21 Jump Street, where Johnny Depp shoots a judge and kills him, and in the next episode it's like it never happened. A rookie cop kills a judge and no one cares? It's kind of the flaw with episodic TV. Some episodes can be really serious or have traumatic experiences, but there's no continuation. Some episodes are like this in Star Trek: The Next Generation, thinking in particular of when Troy got SA'd, never mentioned again. X-Files kinda changed the game with its mix of episodic Monster of the Week episodes and its canon ongoing storyline Alien episodes. And I thought of another. In ER, Anthony Edwards' character becomes inexplicably super racist in one episode, completely against his normal characterization as a caring and compassionate guy, and then he apologizes for it to his black colleagues at the end of the episode. All is forgiven, it's never mentioned again, and he goes back to his normal character for the rest of the series. I'm actually glad this doesn't happen anymore. Story 2. I have doubts that a clip show episode would do well these days. These used to be made to pad out your episodes without a big budget cost, but shows are increasingly getting written and budgeted around how many episodes the story needs, and not how many they need to fill every time slot that season. Clip shows also worked because people didn't necessarily watch every episode of a show back then. A lot of shows took some time to find an audience, so when the clip show played, there was a good chance you were seeing some clips that you were unfamiliar with. In the age of streaming, that's not really the case anymore. If you start watching a show that's now in its 4th season, you're going to start from episode 1 on streaming. I tend to use The Simpsons as an example. Today, many early episodes are iconic, but back in the 90s, you either caught older episodes in reruns during the off-season, which could be highly variable, or you had them on VHS. I remember in college one year, one of my housemates had recorded like 8 tapes worth of episodes, and it was amazing to have, but there were a ton of missing episodes. It wasn't until the early 2000s, when I had TiVo mostly dedicated to The Simpsons, that I happened to see some older episodes I had no recollection of. It took them until 2001 to start releasing DVD sets, and that was about 1 season per year at first. And that's The Simpsons. I remember being so excited when my TiVo started recording the A-Team because you just couldn't find some shows, even if they were highly memorable. We sort of take for granted that iconic TV shows are entirely available now with just a click or two. I do kind of miss the feeling of catching a good episode you never saw before, or catching one of your favorites. Story 3. Misunderstandings that can now be cleared up by a text or cell phone call. Entire episodes used to be built around people not being able to find or communicate with each other and just having to figure stuff out. Honestly, it's part of why I prefer a lot of pre-millennium dramas. It feels so un-TV-like when potentially major character beats are just spelled out and neatly resolved over text messages. Just seems a clunky way of delivering plot, exposition, character progression, conflict, and all those essential dramatic elements that we don't really need to think about when texting IRL. Friends wouldn't exist if they all had basic texting capabilities, and if you add in anything else like just a basic computer with dial-up internet, it would ruin the show completely. So many other series being mentioned still have enough other plot points that could have saved the series, but I can't see it with Friends. It drives me bonkers when shows just ignore this. At least make up an excuse about how so-and-so always turns off his phone when he's out doing XYZ. Don't just never mention the possibility of calling or texting the person in the first place, which just has the audience spending the entire episode going, "What is wrong with you?" There's a real lack of misunderstandings in modern TV. Story 4. Game show hosts kissing female contestants on the lips. Richard Dawson actually met his wife this way. It's strange, but they did a poll after he got called out for it, and viewers said they liked to see him kiss women for luck, so it continued. Lots of societal brainwashing into thinking this is okay. On British TV, asking every non-white contestant, "Yeah, but where are you originally from?" after they respond to "Where are you from?" with a British town. I had challenge TV in the background while at a hospital a lot last year. Grew grew up in the 90s. My parents would always watch a show on Univision, a Spanish language channel that had this show called Sábado Gigante. The host, Don Francisco, would always do this fake-out kiss thing where he'd walk up and ask the audience members questions, and if it was an attractive lady, he'd usually end with asking for a peck on the cheek. He'd do that motion where he turns to get his cheek closer and then turns toward her at the last second, as the lady is landing the kiss only to get him on the lips. Everyone laughed and applauded him every time. TV is a lot less creepy now, or at least differently creepy. Story 5. Jokes about spousal abuse, or just straight up slapping women on screen. The amount of old movies and TV shows where a woman speaks up about something and gets backhanded is absolutely insane. If you see a woman get beat up in anything now, it's normally a storyline of domestic violence to highlight that it's wrong or to show a bad character, but in old movies, it's the hero of the story slapping his girlfriend around like nothing. That started to change in the 1970s when people in long-term marriages got divorced instead of bitterly tolerating you. Women having their own incomes enabled them to strike out on their own. Now, if a couple starts making bitter jokes against each other, everyone would just tell them to split up. Yes, growing up has effectively ruined a bunch of John Wayne movies, since it seems a bit of a theme in some of what used to be my favorites as a kid. For example, The Quiet Man, even though Sean refuses to fight as the main theme, there are zero problems with yanking his wife nearly off her feet, dragging her across town, and throwing her at her brother's feet, while the helpful crowd of onlookers offers him a stick to beat the lovely lady with, McClintock. The climax of the movie is JW chasing his wife through town in her underwear, pulling her over his knee and then spanking her with a small iron shovel. Then he hands the shovel to his future son-in-law with the words, "Keep it, you may need it." Story 6. Suicide used to be a common joke, especially in cartoons. If you wanted to show a character was sad, they would pull out a gun and put it to their head. Daffy Duck did this all the time and it was normal. Hell, I remember a SpongeBob episode where they went to this medieval times type place and SpongeBob made his usual naively annoying comment to one of the employees. The guy took his spear and aimed it at his own neck before giving up and sighing, "Someday, but not today." Just looked it up, that episode aired in 2006. The very last scene of the original run of Tom and Jerry was them both sitting together on train tracks. It was quite a note to end on, still flew over my head as a child. It can be funny in the right situations, but you gotta really know what you're doing. There was a Casper the Friendly Ghost episode where Casper was sad since people were scared of him and he didn't have any friends, so he decided to do himself in and step in front of a train. It didn't work though, because he was already dead. Things were crazy back then. Honestly, I feel like this kind of humor would play well in today's youth, although maybe it wouldn't fly with the censors these days. Story 7. Rapy men. It's crazy how common it was. In the 70s, sitcoms, for a girl to be saved from a rapey guy when her friend or roommate dropped in early. And it was never a big deal. The guy was just scolded for not being a gentleman and then sent on his merry way because, hey, boys will be boys. If anyone has seen Three's Company, a 70s sitcom about a single guy living with two single girls, so he has to pretend he's gay or the landlord won't rent them an apartment, this dude was always getting home just in time to pry some guy off of one of his unwilling roommates. Then they just kicked the guy out, had some ice cream and joked about how the girl had terrible taste in men. Dude, I've seen that. While the actual attempted R wasn't played for laughs, the aftermath was always supposed to be humorous. The roommates would joke about the attempted rape, like, "Boy, Janet, you really can pick them." Or Jack, the male roommate, would be like, "Well, your date may have tried to argue, Janet, but you're not the only one who had a bad night. My date went back to her ex and stuck me with the bill for a lobster dinner." It was crazy. Like Chrissy's disgusting older boss who would literally chase her around the desk at work was played for laughs. He wasn't a predator, he was a naughty old man. And the situation was only resolved after they tricked his wife into showing up at the office and catching him in the act. At the end of the first Back to the Future film, when Marty's dad is scolding Biff to go wash his car, they reminisce with a chuckle about how they have always had to keep an eye on that guy. Chuckle, chuckle. Remember when he tried to R your wife in the car in that parking lot that one time and you punched him out? Yeah, he sure is a character, chuckle, chuckle. Story 8. SA as character development for a female character. It was a very common trope in soap operas. Luke and Laura on General Hospital were moved into a relationship because he SA'd her on the floor of his nightclub. Cricket, Blair, nice but vapid teen model on The Young and the Restless, became Christine Blair, a law student, when she was raped in her apartment. Marty Saybrook in One Life to Live was portrayed as a spoiled, snotty, and, heavens to Betsy, promiscuous party girl who was upset the town's pastor wouldn't date her. After being ganged on the show, her character became a psychiatrist. Brooke Logan Forrester from The Bold and the Beautiful was set up to be SA'd by a man hired by her own former mother-in-law in order to set up a truce between Brooke and her mother-in-law, and so on for decades. The irony is not lost on me that soap operas were women's entertainment. Hell, Game of Thrones did it with Sansa Stark. There was also that terrible scene with the Hound where she says she's glad it happened because it made her a badass. The hell? So the writers of these shows actually thought women would have a glow-up, come to Jesus moment and quit their wrong ways after getting SA'd and, checks notes, become functioning members of society or have a true love relationship with their assaulter? Yikes. This type of stuff is still surprisingly common in TV shows. Story 9. I gotta say, I went back and watched some episodes of A-Team, and those scenes of Hannibal disguising himself as a Chinese laundromat operator made me choke on my drink. Dana Carvey on the 80s and 90s SNL did a character called Ching Chang who was a grossly offensive Asian stereotype, bowl haircut, thick glasses, and over-the-top accent. The character appeared 7 times over 14 years. Chinese jokes were so prevalent that we didn't even think twice about them. Same with Native Americans. It's really hard to explain how perceptions have changed. Society is continually getting smarter. No, really, it's proven. As we get more and more exposed to the world at large, we all just accepted that we were taught and didn't think much of it until we had a reason to. Many Asian people expressed enjoyment at the exposure, coming out of obscurity. That kind of blinded us to the much larger population that was hurt and even oppressed by such nonsense. I don't really cringe at these things because it shows how we've grown. It is a good reminder to see that we aren't continuing those stereotypes. The number of rides at Disneyland that have been torn down and changed because of their extremely racist messages, Briar Patch Log Flume, is a testament to that change that should happen. I cringe when I see things that are still acceptable, even though everyone should know better. I'm reminded of the character of Mr. Kim from South Park who runs the Chinese restaurant. He was a horribly offensive stereotype until the last couple of years when Matt and Trey, realizing how much of their background characters were now recognized as offensive, started doing some canon updates. Because the offensive stereotyping was baked into the character, they decided to fix the canon by literally making him a white guy with a serious dissociative identity disorder. The episode ended with the townspeople being like, wow, that's an offensive stereotype, but there are no Asian people in town and we really like having a Chinese restaurant, so I guess we're gonna let him keep doing this. I'm sure the responses to this were mixed, and I'm entirely too helplessly Caucasian to render an opinion either way, but I did think it was pretty clever. When even South Park thinks it can't happen anymore, it probably won't. Story 10. Running through the airport to confess one's love for the protagonist. Home Alone premises. These wouldn't happen today with current security measures. The Office kinda did a good job when Pam was trying to say bye to Michael. The only thing that confused me was, how did Pam get through without a ticket? Did she just buy a ticket to go say goodbye to Michael? I always assumed so because she was the only one Michael didn't get to say goodbye to at the office, and Jim told her that he was actually leaving that day, so she must have felt guilty for not being there, especially since she and Jim are the only ones who knew when he was really leaving. Story 11. Comedic town drunk. Think Otis from The Andy Griffith Show. I think part of the problem is the comedic town drunk is something so many people can relate to because every small town seems to have one. My town growing up certainly did. His name was Silas. He drove a lawnmower everywhere because he lost his license and would shout, "Yeehaw!" when it reached max speed. The man could consume an impossible quantity of alcohol and just as quickly piss it all out. He was homeless and on a first-name basis with every police officer in the county. He could tell the funniest, dirtiest jokes, and in late autumn would commit some minor harmless crime to spend the winter in jail, where he'd put on a lot of weight, instead of spending it in his tent. He was also a very reliable handyman, Our family hired him a few times to remove massive trees, and he'd drop them right where he said he would. But that's where the comedy and trope end. I've referred to him in the past tense because he died of liver failure. He was ill with an addiction and desperately needed help to get past it. And that's what the TV tropes fail to discuss. Consequently, it's funny to the audience because it conveniently ignores the harsh reality of the situation. My grandfather was the town drunk, or one of them, small town. Everyone loved him because he was such a hard worker, and my grandmother was an upstanding lady in the community. He even played Santa in the Christmas parade. My grandmother's church got its first air conditioner because she told the pastor and staff that the bar had one, and if they put one in, her husband would come to church. And he did. He died before I was born of cirrhosis of the liver. Ah yeah, the lovable and brainless alcoholic, Barney from The Simpsons, is another great example. Story 12. Not really a TV trope, but slapping women who were supposedly having a panic attack was almost a trope in westerns and noir movies. In that period, a slap across the face was the go-to response to anyone having a panic attack, man or woman. I don't think it's a great idea, but I can understand the reasoning behind why it was done. Use a sudden external stimuli to try to force the panicking person out of spiraling thought patterns, but box breathing and other grounding techniques are much better options that actually work without violence. I would like to add to this the idea that it is okay for a woman to hit a man. In movies or TV, women could always hit a man and it was considered fine because, you know, sexism, woman weak, man strong, blech, literally assault. Also chasing women, not taking no for an answer. Story 13. People walking around with amnesia. Every freaking show, someone hit their head and had amnesia, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Like, hello? Brain injury? Usually, the solution to problems brought by a blow to the head is another blow to the head, because TBIs are like on/off switches. Even worse, sometimes the cure was depicted as a second blow to the head. Even as a very young kid, I knew this made no sense. Ah yes, even more brain injury. Story 14. Black women, if they were even cast, were usually relegated to obscure roles like maids. One of the first TV shows with a prominent black woman was Star Trek, which featured Nichelle Nichols as a bridge officer. It is said that her performance inspired Whoopi Goldberg to pursue acting, so it is quite fitting that Goldberg landed a recurring role in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Goldberg petitioned for that role. She told the producers that, as TOS had been so important to her, she wanted to be on the show. She even suggested that she be the bartender so that she didn't have to be part of the main cast and could appear when she was available. I was watching an interview where there seemed to be a misunderstanding between Goldberg and TNG. Goldberg really wanted to participate but was sort of ignored because TNG didn't think it was serious. She was an A-list actress at the time, coming off greats like Sister Act. Nobody thought she really wanted to join the first season of The Next Generation. Even Stewart thought it was going to be a short run. She ended up requesting in person instead of through her agent at a party or on the lot one day and was accepted immediately. I remember reading something about how Nichelle was thinking about quitting during the first season, and when she went to the creator to tell him, he asked her to take the weekend to think about it first because she was super important to what his vision of the show was to be. She agreed and randomly met Martin Luther King Jr. at an event that weekend. He told her that she was doing amazing work for the movement by portraying a black woman scientist in the future who was every bit an equal to everyone else. He also joked that Star Trek was the only show that his wife and he let their kids stay up to watch. Story 15. There's an episode of I Love Lucy where slipping Lucy a roofie is a plot device. If I remember correctly, she's convinced Ricky wants to kill her and thus starts acting all jumpy and paranoid around him, so Ricky consults a doctor who gives him a sedative to help her de-stress, and he slips it in her drink. She sees this and thinks it's poison, so she switches the glasses, but he switches them back. She finds out and thinks she's going to die. Honestly, it's still pretty funny, though the date rape vibes aren't as bad as the fact that Lucy thought her husband wanted her dead and tried to trick him into drinking poison. That's pretty dark. Cosby Show. He advised putting sleeping stuff in the sauce at a barbecue so the ladies would be easier to deal with. They did it. The women got all drunks and sleepy and horny for some reason. In light of his drugging women in real life, it was extremely disturbing. Edit. I'm meaning that this was done by characters in an episode. A commenter noted that this may not be accurate. My apologies. I was going from memory. I believe this was part of the episode though. Story 16. Sex pests. There used to always be a sitcom character relentlessly hitting on women and talking about how horny they were. The most recent two I can think of were probably Fez and early series Howard Wolowitz. I don't think it's a completely erased type of joke, but you don't really see full-on sex pests anymore, and rewatching some of these interactions is actually a little surprising. There was a good Big Bang episode, yes, it happened, particularly in the first 3 seasons, in which he pulled his whole incelish Madame I am Lothario routine on Penny, and she makes him feel like a little worm, which he is. I do sort of recall the other characters siding with Howard though. He doesn't mean anything by it, you've hurt his feelings. To their credit, she doesn't back off. She does soften it a little and says something along the lines of, "Look, you idiot, no woman wants this." So they did sort of deal with Howard eventually. I can't watch NCIS, even though everyone says I'd like it, because I couldn't get past the sidekick guy hitting on every single person with boobs. Like, you are at work. I made it through like 7 episodes, looked up to see if he died or left the show, and he's in it for a long time. So I gave up. There will probably never be another Barney Stinson. Story 17. Love spells or potions being a lighthearted bit of hijink. I like how in Harry Potter they're occasionally presented as a bit of innocent teenage shenanigans. Oh, and are also a central part of the origin of Wizard Hitler. They could have headlined their ban with that. Love potions actually beat out elf slavery for the concept in Harry Potter that sickens me the most in how accepted it is. I couldn't be a wizard there because my sanity would never be unflipped. They talk crap about muggles all the time despite being a bunch of backward, racist, inbred, rapist, slave-owning, corrupt, heartless, fart-sniffing community of whimsical douchebags. Almost every character deserves to get kicked in the teeth at least once. A movie with Sandra Bullock called Love Potion No. 9, where chemists get some concoction from a fortune teller or something, and they reverse engineer it to be a breath spray that forces the opposite sex to become very sexually interested anytime they hear your voice. The side effect is that members of the same sex will become violent towards you, and once the effect wears off, the people you used it on will hate you for X amount of time. So of course, the dude is seen grabbing a literal handful of condoms and a funny shot of the windows for a sorority house lighting as he bones each of them. When he runs out, he's arrested, and we get a mugshot, but it's played or laughed because the loser scientist finally got laid. A lot. Sandra Bullock's character, meanwhile, ropes in a rich dude and gets a she is all that makeover. Story 18. People living in New York City and LA that never lock the front door. Like 4 out of 5 of my NYC apartments when I lived there had automatic locking front doors. What the shows should have done was show people walking out the door to get the mail without their key and having to climb their fire escape or credit card break into their home. I remember watching the first season of You and how Beck lived in a walk-up apartment in New York City with no job. She had money from school and no curtains. What the fuck? It drove me up the wall. I think she also didn't lock her doors. I know the TV shows, everyone has huge apartments. The Big Bang Theory was a 6-story walk-up. No way I would even visit someone. Those NYC apartments from the big shows had to be like $10K a month for rent, and people were doing low-end work. Yeah, that was another thing I forgot to say. The windows have no covering on them. Like the joke on Friends was them looking into other people's apartments. Apparently, the reason for unrealistically big NYC apartments in TV shows is that you couldn't fit all the filming equipment if you tried to use an accurately sized apartment. Story 19. Romanticizing teachers dating their students. Yeah, which led to a slightly interestingly aged scene when it came to an episode of Married with Children. On the one hand, the episode severely romanticizes the idea. On the other, whilst it is all meant to be a joke at Buck's expense, it does mean the ending where Al turns up and calls the substitute he makes as preying on his son a disgusting pervert to her face, and then sets the police on her feel weirdly right. Cardcaptor Sakura does it twice and completely makes it a good thing. Her father was her mom's teacher, and it's why her family refuses to have anything to do with the family. There is an episode where Sakura accidentally finds her grandfather, and one of her friends in school is in love with the teacher, and it's clearly reciprocated, and it's super creepy for them because they're like 12. Story 20. Making fun of trans people, gay people too, but the trans thing was seen as acceptable as recently as 10 years ago. I was going to say something along the lines of gay cast members too. The thing is, even in the earlier shows that were open and tolerant of gay people, like Ellen and Roseanne, unfortunately the gay cast members were relegated to a stock gay caricature. They couldn't be anything other than that. Their entire persona and story were about them being gay. They weren't given any real character development. That's kind of still the case. I mean, we've definitely made progress, but with most shows, the gay character is relegated to a sidekick or supporting role, and the bulk of their stories do revolve around being gay, instead of allowing them to be their own character who just happens to be gay. I'm not saying that's always the case. Holt comes to mind in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but all too often it is. I don't know, maybe in another 10 or 20 years, we'll see more fully formed characters who just happen to be gay. Gus Fring is pretty much the only gay character I can think of in modern TV where being gay wasn't his only identity. Story 21. The contentious wife or husband trope, like Al and Peg Bundy. I know I think about the dynamic in that show from time to time. I think it was a genuine counterpoint to not just the happy husband, but also the horny one. Like, here's his bombshell wife who's always ready to go, and the husband is all, I'm too tired. I think that was pretty subversive for the time. It strikes me as one of those things that makes sense as a cleverly subversive writing move in its own era, but that makes less and less sense as time goes on, leaving only the top-level read of their dynamic as toxic. Oh, it very much is. It was written to be basically the opposite of every 50s trope. The husband is too tired to sleep with his wife, so he's turning down her advances. His kids are screw-ups, but generally pretty happy. His wife is happy, and he works in a woman's shoe store of all places. Satire just doesn't age well because people forget the tropes that are being satirized. Yeah, I watched this show recently after not seeing it since I was a kid and realized how much of the humor relied on it being the complete opposite of the normal sitcom family paradigm. There's certainly a super lowbrow aspect to it, but on a higher level it's making fun of itself and parodying the genre in general. In a way, it's quite brilliant. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.